You know, they say Twitter is useless, but sometimes you have interesting arguments that turn into good podcasts. Should non-citizens of Canada receive lighter sentences than citizens of Canada? We get into it right now. It's On the Line. This episode of On the Line is brought to you by Forestry For The Future. Canada's housing crisis demands bold, scalable solutions. Build Canada Homes is an opportunity to leverage Canadian wood in modern construction. Wood-based methods like mass timber and modular construction can significantly reduce build times, waste, and carbon emissions while supporting local economies. Expanding building codes, streamlining approvals, and prioritizing domestic wood in federal projects could double demand and foster job creation in rural and northern communities. Despite trade challenges and market volatility, a partnership between industry and government is vital to stabilize the sector, enhance competitiveness, and deliver innovative, sustainably sourced Canadian wood products for homes across Canada and abroad. With capacity growing across provinces, stable demand and predictable financing are key to unlocking the sector's potential. We need to build Canada Homes with Canadian wood. To learn more, visit forestryforthefuture.ca. Crime, justice, public safety. These are issues we've been talking a lot about in this country over the last couple of months. We're obviously going to keep talking about them, but there's an interesting subset of stories right now that's getting a lot of attention. The issue is judges either deciding or defense lawyers requesting lighter sentences for people who are here on temporary immigration visas or permanent residents who have not yet obtained citizenship. Why the lighter sentences? Because being sentenced to a serious crime, and we'll get into how those are defined in a minute, will exclude you from getting your citizenship. It'll blow up your immigration trajectory. We're going to talk in a moment with Peter Sankoff. He's a criminal defense lawyer, a professor, and overall a guy who he doesn't call himself an expert. I'll call him an expert. He saw something I had tweeted. He disagreed. We had a back and forth. I invited him on. Sometimes, folks, you just need some content. So stick around. My conversation with Peter Sankoff starts right now. Well, here he is, and I've offered him the chance to introduce himself. He probably has a better sense of that than I am. My guest is Peter Sankoff, as I've mentioned in the intro already. Peter, you and I are going to have a conversation here. Before we get to the conversation, though, can you take a minute and just tell the listeners, the viewers, the audience who you are?
So I do a lot of things and wear a lot of hats. I am a professor at the Faculty of Law at the University of Alberta, but I also run my own law firm doing mostly criminal appellate litigation. That's called Sankoff Criminal Law. And I also run an online education service for criminal defense lawyers across the country, and that's called Criminal Defense Essentials. So I often comment on legal issues that are pertinent to lawyers and the public alike.
So you hate free time?
Yeah, I'm busy. Let's put it that way. But I can't pass up a chance to talk about important issues. So.
No, and I appreciate that, especially this was a last-minute invite with the budget coming out. So, Peter, here I'm just breaking the fourth wall. We record these on Monday. We release them Tuesdays. As a journalist and commentator, for me, that's a nightmare scenario because I'm going to be releasing content that's going to be obsolete by the end of the day, right? So you got to have to find a topic that people are going to be interested in no matter what's in the budget. So you and I talking on the weekend actually was a bit of stroke of luck for me on that front. So let me recap what happened. I had retweeted favorably something that has been posted by the Conservative MP, Michelle Rempel-Garner. She has a private member's bill that she has put before the House of Commons, which seeks to amend legally how sentencing can be handled by judges. Specifically, she wants to exclude immigration status as something that judges can consider. I'm not going to get into the ton of detail about the recent stories, but there have been a few recent stories where judges have either offered apparently lenient sentences, or defense teams have asked for lenient sentences because if you are a non-permanent resident of Canada, or even if you are a permanent resident of Canada, but you're not yet a citizen, if you are convicted of serious crimes, and there's a definition of what applies for that in terms of sentence length, you can be deported. So judges have been thinking, and you can jump in if I'm phrasing this correctly, but judges appear to have either done or have been asked to sentence people in a way that will not trigger immigration consequences. This is controversial, to put it mildly. Michelle Rempel-Garner thinks that shouldn't be the case, hence her bill. I agree with her, and I said so. You disagreed with me.
I do, because I think there's a lot of devil in those details, including what's a serious crime. So let's just get started with the basic idea. I understand that part of your concern is that it's not fair, in a sense, in that permanent residents are getting lower sentences, in effect, than a similarly situated Canadian would. And I just don't believe that's the case, and I'll explain why. But before I do so, I'll just say there are always going to be outliers. I'm not telling you that it's done perfectly. That would be crazy. Of course, there's going to be some judgments and some arguments by defense lawyers that are going to be way out there. And you might have a judge who reduces it way too far. That stuff does happen. That's just flaws in the justice system. It's like saying, similarly situated Canadian offenders should not be treated differently. You'll have one guy get 6 months and the other guy gets 6 years. That stuff is bad, and that stuff needs to be controlled on appeal. And I think it is controlled generally on appeal. So when we get back to the basic fundamentals, the question is, should we account differently for residents facing immigration consequences? The base argument that I'm hearing from Ms. Garner and yourself is that we shouldn't, because that's disadvantageous or unfair to Canadians who don't get the benefit, right? Because the permanent residents do, but Canadian citizens don't get the benefit of the sentence. Okay, so let's just start with where I see this coming from. I think that analogy is way too simplistic for a number of serious reasons. The way I see it, permanent residents are facing massive disadvantages by the virtue of the sentence that's going to be handed down to them. And those disadvantages are incredibly severe. I realize that immigration consequences don't count notionally as punishment per se, because they're not part of a sentence. They're triggered by a separate regime. But what happens to these offenders as a result, what is called the consequence of this particular sentence and conviction, is going to be far more severe than any Canadian will ever face. So essentially, I as a Canadian, I feel a personal vested interest in this, partly because my wife, until very recently, was a permanent resident. She was a permanent resident here for 13 years. She was unable to get citizenship simply because at that time, her country of origin wouldn't allow it. So she had to give up her citizenship to her country to become a citizen here. And that was too much for her to do, and I don't blame her. She has connections.
Peter, just to interrupt, is that because her country doesn't permit dual citizenship? It was kind of
It does now. Her country is Germany. They just started to permit it this year. So until that time, so she is one of those people who is subject to the whims. I don't think she loves Canada any less. Our family has made our life here. I benefit from her presence here. That is just the way the marriage works and whatever. But I was always concerned about this because I know that there is no distinction between permanent resident, temporary, whatever. So I have clients, I'll just tell you, who fall through. We could complain about why they stay with permanent residents, whether it's the cost of getting citizenship or whatever. Permanent residents, especially, in my opinion, are Canadians. I mean, we can debate that if you like, but they play an important role in Canadian society. And usually when they come here, I'll tell you about just one of my clients as an example. I have a client who came here from Ecuador. He moved here with his family. They made their life here. They had 3 kids here. They are entrenched, but he's never gone through the basics. He's just never done it. I don't know why. He's going to do it when we finish his proceedings. I promise you that. But he has been living with an offense. That's fine. He's got to deal with it like any Canadian. You get charged with something, you're going to face those consequences. But he's living with the additional fear. And that is a massive fear that he will be deported to a country he no longer remembers. And that's a very realistic fear for a lot of people. So my position is this. What's really happening to a certain extent is that the offender who's being sentenced is getting one of the questions that the court is forced to do is they've got to look at the personal circumstances of the offender. And the Supreme Court has said that those personal circumstances include whatever consequences. And here's another thing. No Canadians are treated alike. And the reason is because every person who's sentenced by the justice system faces different consequences. So for example, if I'm a lawyer, okay, and I get sentenced for whatever, like let's assume it doesn't involve my practice, but if I get sentenced, I'm going to face additional consequences than the same person who's involved in, say, a fight in a bar. If you get involved in a fight in a bar, Matt, and you're a journalist, your career will most likely go on however you like. I, however...
Depending on who I was fighting, it could get a boost.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But my point being is that I will face more severe consequences. And the reason for that is because as a lawyer, I will face the additional collateral consequences of losing my license, suspension, massive pay loss while I'm suspended. Like, these are all things the court considers. And to me, it's not crazy to say that they will consider immigration consequences in the exact same way. Now, the way this is supposed to work, and I said at the beginning, I've put out the outlier cases. The way it's supposed to work is you're not supposed to get some massive reduction. It's not supposed to happen. And the question of what is a serious offense is, in my opinion, right at the core of this. If we were talking about murderers, let's be clear, murderers are going to get deported. So are, armed robbers. So are sexual offenders. They're all going because they're all way over the amount and there's no way to reduce them down. The question is this: when we're at the margins and we're dealing with people with smaller offenses, can we take those potential immigration consequences into account given how harsh they are? So to me, a lot of this really turns, Matt, on that question of what's a serious crime. And the answer is just about everything's a serious crime. And one last point I make, because I know you want to jump in. We've been ratcheting up penalties for almost every crime in the last 15 years. We haven't moved the immigration threshold at all. So as a result, what's happened is I've watched, just to give you an example, sexual assault. And I'm not saying it's wrong to ratchet up the penalties at all. I'm just saying that what's happened with sexual assault is we've gone in the last 10 to 15 years from 12-month sentences to 3 years, 4 years and up. Same thing with, ironically, child pornography. But these things have gone up. And as a result, what's happened is you just have more and more people pulled in.
Into the serious crime category.
Yeah, exactly.
We've inflated the sentences in a way that relates the definition under the law of what constitutes a serious crime.
That's what's happened is we haven't adjusted both ends of the equation. Yep. So what we're doing is we're pushing. And all I'm saying is this. I have no issue. I have been part of cases where people have been deported many times. And I promise you, most of those times, I don't lose any sleep over it. You can do a whatever and you're gone. But there are times where I really do lose sleep over it. And the reason is because you're talking about crimes like dangerous driving. Bad, unquestionably, cause bodily harm or death. Bad. But what we're talking about here is things that anybody could do if they're driving in a way that's a little bad on that occasion. And the trigger is so easy to hit. That 6 months is so easy to hit. And as a result, I am concerned about any decision to say, well, let's make it even harder. Let's just make it even harder.
Lots to talk about, Peter. And I think I got two. First of all, by legal standards, it was quite a modest rant. I've had some real barrages before. I have two questions for you, and then we can have probably a more substantive conversation about this. But one of them is a personal question, nothing too personal. One of them is more philosophical question. You had said a few minutes ago that you and I get into a bar fight, maybe against each other, depending on how this podcast goes. Maybe it's separate bar fights in similar circumstances. I would face less serious overall consequences than you would. You didn't actually say why, but I think it's because criminal convictions would jeopardize your legal license.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. They would at least put me into a suspension. Like I could lose 6 months of work revenue, for example. Yeah. So
I have a question for you. How do you feel about that? Do you think it's unfair or are you okay with it?
I mean, look, I'm a lawyer. I'm in a position where I have to take account of my own actions, so I shouldn't be involved in any crimes. But at a certain extent, I guess the question is not how I feel. Like if I ever committed a crime like that, I would feel, that I should face that penalty because that's how I personally feel. But I guess the question I would say if I were representing that person or representing myself, I would say, Judge, like when you're deciding what the number is for me, take into account the fact that I'm also getting punished in another form. And I guess what I would say is at the end of the day, like you have to remember that like sentencing, I mean, most of the legal system is more art than science, but there is nowhere in the system that is more art than science than sentencing. Like I have defended the right of different judges to take the exact same facts. One guy smashes, the other guy's merciful. That is the way it is. Like we can't do it any other way. So I guess my point is, should they be able to consider that? Yes. What they do with it, that's another question. And the Supreme Court has made it clear that collateral consequences are a minor part of sentencing. They're important, but they're minor.
So I think I'm going to compress your response down there into the bare bones of it, which is that, yeah, you think it would be fair for you to be held to a higher standard. And I really appreciate your noble sentiment, Peter, but I think it's interesting that you're okay being held to a higher standard, but you're not okay the system holding someone else to a higher standard. I'm not the lawyer here, and I'm the guy telling you, I actually don't think you should be held to a higher standard. I don't know what the standard should be, but it should be an equal one. And I think you're like, it's just, I can't help but note the incongruity of you going, yeah, okay, as a lawyer, I know what the stakes are. I know what the consequences would be. I got to live my life accordingly, but then make the argument that everyone else shouldn't.
Well, I don't think there's an incongruity because what I'm suggesting is that the factors that go into it for me are different than they are for you. And I need to be sentenced based on whatever the factors are for me. And you need to be sentenced. Like, I just think there's this mythical idea that we're both equal. Everybody comes into the sentencing process and we are equal, but our circumstances are different. I have kids. I don't know if you have kids, but I have kids. So I've got to be responsible for working for my kids. Like that's taken into account. Like all these things, there is no two offenders who are alike. It doesn't exist. So as a result, I have no issue with the court system treating everybody on an individual basis and trying to figure out how that punishment should fit for that person, keeping into aside society's interest, of course.
You know what, Peter? I'm not going to flog a dead horse here, but I'm going to say the audience will decide whether or not your statement of you should be aware of your circumstances and govern yourselves accordingly should be the Peter standard or the Canadian standard. And I think they'll have their own views on that. I did have another question for you, and it was more the philosophical one. You have raised a point. I think it's a good one. I'm going to give you open credit for this. It's something I'm aware of as being a problem. Look, I'm not a lawyer, but I happen to either blessing or curse be surrounded by lawyers, so I pick up a lot of stuff by osmosis. I am aware of what we were talking about a minute ago is sentencing inflation. So the idea that once upon a time, there probably was a reasonable good faith effort to establish like a floor below which offenses would be not serious and above which they would be serious. But then decades of tough on crime, political posturing causes sentencing inflation. And now crimes that would have been considered originally non-serious or less serious are now under the law considered serious. And I think you're right. That raises an interesting issue. Let me put a proposal to you. How do you feel about excluding immigration as a sentencing factor if we raise the floor? Like if we actually did adjust that to keep track with the sentencing inflation, where does that strike you? How does that strike you?
Like, this goes back to our original conversation, which was on Twitter to a certain extent, or on X, or whatever you want to call it. Like, I'm always open to considering different ways of fixing particular problems. If there is a convincing view, like I've already suggested to you, we can do that in one of two ways. We can reduce the sentence floor, or we can raise the immigration automatic. We could create a more nuanced immigration system, right? We could do that. I'm open to either of those, and I think either of those solutions is better than the one that's being proposed, because I don't think that gets at the core of the problem, and I just think it says equality above all, and boom, it's like a simple solution. My general view is this, and you're going to ask me other questions about other stuff later. It's always the same. We try to come up with simple solutions to complex problems. And I agree with you. If we raised the floor and made serious offending more, that would not be my preferred solution. I would prefer to adjust it on the immigration side, but I would have less issue. That's for sure, if you did that.
So I don't want to endorse any position, but could you lay out a hypothetical way of adjusting it on the immigration side? Just hypothetically, what could that look like? Because oh, sure. Well,
yeah,
that's nice then. It's rare I get an easy answer. How do we fix it on the immigration side?
So first of all, I would make much greater distinction between permanent resident and temporary residents. Like, to me, I don't think there is a one size fits all. And I think there needs to be, and in fairness, like, there is some residual safeguards in the immigration. They're just really hard to use. And they're so far down the line that when you're being sentenced for the criminal court doesn't know if those safeguards are going to be triggered, because like it's not automatic deportation, right? We just don't know. We don't know. And what we do know is that the presumption of deportation is automatic. So I would prefer to see it handled on the immigration side, where you set stratas. Like, that's not that hard. Like, first of all, like, anything you're punished for over, I don't know, whatever number people felt comfortable, 3 years, 4 years, that's automatic. Like, that's easy, right? I would still have distinctions between permanent residents and people who are here on student visas or whatever.
Yeah.
I have no issue, and most people have no issue deporting someone who's on a student visa. Like, to me, that's easy. You're here on a visa, you commit a crime. I don't have a problem with that. That's deportation, right? It's especially the shorter the visa, the more I would presume that. Where I have more problem, as I said, is with Canadians who've been here for decades, and it's like it's still treated in the same way. So I would like to see more accounting for the nature of the offending, the length of the offending, and whatever. Like, I think, the interesting case of this, and I don't even remember what's happened to him, but like the paradigmatic case of this is the Saskatchewan, sorry, you know better.
The Humboldt.
Sorry, which one?
Humboldt Broncos, the guy who was driving the truck that hit I
mean, we could sit here and discuss that case all day, right? That guy, my argument is that guy did everything that you would hope somebody who committed that kind of crime would do. Like, the crime is bad, no question, punished, whatever. That guy took everything, and he just took it, and he took all the abuse. Like, he has acted about as well as you would hope for any person who has committed that type of act, not fighting it, taking the abuse, standing there, standing up, apologizing, whatever. But he's struck into the deportation stream immediately. Now, we think that's right or wrong. That's a pretty serious offense. So, like, I'm not going to defend it, but I'm trying to say, like, imagine a less serious where it's not 25 people who die, but somebody makes a driving error. They're a permanent resident and they are automatically facing that. I struggle with that. I don't necessarily feel comfortable with those sorts of results.
So there's really interesting ways we can go here, because there's pragmatic versus philosophical. I'm going to tell you a lawyer joke. It's not an actual formal joke, but like I said, I'm surrounded by lawyers. One of the things I constantly try to remind my lawyer friends is that if they were surrounded by dentists as much as I was surrounded by lawyers, they would hear so much about teeth.
Yeah.
And I think you put any group of professionals together and you get this weird black hole effect where, like, there's a center of gravity where you all fall into each other's navels and you get obsessed with the nuance and you forget the fact that you guys are part of a civilization. And I think this happens to every group of professionals, and I do not exclude journalists for this. I do think lawyers might be particularly afflicted by it. And one of the reasons I bring this up is not to dump on you or your entire profession, but I want to sound a note of caution. Something you've said a couple of times, Peter, and you're not wrong, but you've said, oh, we could debate this and we could debate this. Dude, you and I could spend the rest of our natural lives debating so long as we got, like, food, water, and the occasional walk. We could debate this forever. We're never going to settle these issues. What is going to happen in the meantime is that the public is going to be looking at us and thinking, look at those two assholes. What are they talking about? We got people in my community getting killed by, to your example, dangerous driving. We've got, you mentioned some of the other offenses that would certainly qualify for deportation, something like a sexual assault or a homicide. There's a term that I know, and my lawyer friends know it, and it's the term that you'll certainly know, which is, courts prefer to avoid things that bring the administration of justice into disrepute, or however the exact phrase is. And I asked a buddy of mine, what's the law school 101 example of that? And he said, it would be something like allowing a conviction to stand even if evidence has been illegally obtained. Like that would bring administration of justice into disrepute. One of the things that worries me, and I've got polling to back me up, is that tens of millions of my buddies in this country are deciding the justice system sucks. And some of that battle is being lost in places like online forums and Twitter echo chambers. And I'm not siding with that because I think that's bad. And I think that's a multi-front problem we have. We're under attack on all fronts here. But one of the reasons I think something like what Michelle Rempel-Garner has proposed is really good and really necessary, even if it could be improved, and I'm open to that, is because the legal profession as a whole and the court system as a whole seems to have no survival instinct. It does not seem to understand that the peasants in this country are starting to sharpen their pitchforks. And you and I, couple of white collar, upper middle class white dudes having a debate about it, where there's people out there who have been real victims. They've been the victims directly. A loved one has been a victim. We have to start making some changes in this system to protect the integrity of the system itself, or we're going to lose it, and we're not going to like what replaces it. That's more of a philosophical point. I'll yield the floor to you for a minute.
Yeah, so I agree with 90% of what you've said. I'm terrified of that, and I appreciate your putting me in the system. I'm honored. I spent 25 years as a professor studying the system, right? That's what I did. Now I'm still ivory tower, all that, elite, whatever. But there is nothing that worries me more than what you've stated. I don't agree with the solution as if dealing with, what I think are both unprincipled and ineffective solutions to the problem. So I'm not going to jump on board. It's the same thing as saying, well, if we do this, let's use the notwithstanding clause. I don't think these are good solutions. So I'm going to oppose them. But I am telling you, if you go watch my video on what's wrong with sexual assault in this country, and I've done a whole video on it explaining why I think the way we're doing things cannot continue, I agree with you 100% that the courts and the people in it have not done enough to recognize what they are doing and that they are losing the public. I agree 100% on that. And I have come up with, and constantly I'm trying to come up with new ways to make the system more accountable. Now, that doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to go in and give in to I can't give in to people. The last people I ever want to give in to, unfortunately, are those who are victims of crime or relatives, because I think those people, while they have views that should be heard and we should listen to them, I don't ever want to give in to the person. That's why we have a neutral system. We'd be killing off people left, right, and center if we listened to every victim, right? I don't want to do that. And I know that when I'm the victim, I'm the last person who should be deciding of what happens to the other person. So I get all that, but I am of the view that we need to do that. And if you you didn't ask me to launch in. I know who the biggest offender is. And it's like, you want to say,
I've known you half an hour, and I get the feeling you don't need to be asked to launch in.
Yeah. I will tell you that, we're going to talk about the courts. The courts have done a bad job in a lot of ways, and they need to be reined in. The problem is that the biggest offender in criminal justice, it's easy to find them. It's Parliament. Parliament has completely failed the criminal justice system. There's just no doubt about it. They refuse to deal with any of the concerns, and instead they only deal with hot button issues that pop up here and there. And I'm like, I've got a list of concerns. There are real problems, but nobody's listening. That's the problem.
You know what? I will do you the favor of a little bit later on the podcast. I will listen. I'll let you enumerate some of those, and you'll be able to talk to my audience about that. But let's actually take on a couple of the other issues first. Now, you said a minute ago that the biggest offender is Parliament. I mean, in a pretty meta way, I blame Parliament for almost everything. I mean, downstream of them, I tend to blame the voters. I'm just going to warn you again a little bit that system participants can sometimes lose perspective because you're too close to it. The cliche, not seeing the forest for the trees, applies. I don't hesitate to blame Parliament, but I also look at the system as a whole, and I can tell you, and again, so you don't think I'm not picking on lawyers, every doctor in the abstract agrees that our healthcare system has major problems. They all seem to hate every proposed thing to do about it. And I think human beings in any profession are pulled between knowing there are problems in a system and hating change. And I don't know how we solve that. I suspect you and I are not going to crack human psychology on the balance of this podcast. But you had said a minute ago that like you're coming up with solutions, and we'll hear what some of those proposals are in a bit. But I think if that's the case, Peter, you are a rarity. You are a very precious flower. Because in my experience, and it's interesting, I'll mention this to you as well. In my experience, no one likes non-experts coming in and criticizing the way the system works. You peasant, you don't really know what you're talking about here, you ruffian. The problem is you get any of the people who are making that argument off their record and ask them, hey, how do you think the system's working? They'll tell you they think it's working badly. You know, I don't think in the last 5 or 6 years I have spoken to anyone in any capacity who's involved in the legal system, Crown, defense, courtroom itself, judge, staff, even some of the guys at senior levels in the bureaucracy who administer this stuff. I think if you were to do a poll, are things going well? You would get 0 positive responses to that. And then we try to have conversations about this. I'm not hearing a lot of solutions, and I'm also not hearing a lot of openness to this stuff here. I don't know if what Michelle Rempel-Garner is proposing is perfect. I'm very open to some of the proposals you've made as being a solution to it. But she may be nearly alone in offering an imperfect answer to a largely ignored problem.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think on the list of problems with the justice system, this would rank somewhere between 670 and 852. Yeah. I don't think this is, again, for the number of cases it impacts, it strikes me it's a pretty negligible input. But I also think, I'm not going to ask why Ms. Garner's focused on this particular problem. I mean, that's up to her. And she may see it as a big problem, and I know you do as well. I don't, but I do think, like what you said earlier, has some merit. A lot of people don't have solutions. I'm lucky enough to be a professor who's looked at the system from the exterior. I've been very lucky. I spent 20 years looking at it from the outside. And then in 2015, I went back inside. And what I saw shocked the hell out of me. I could list 50 things that I cannot believe are happening. And it's like, yeah, it's a real problem. It's a huge problem. But I am trying to offer solutions. And when we get there, we'll see how we do.
So, I have not talked to Michelle about this. I don't have any inside dope on why she's doing this, but I'm going to tell you why I think it's important. And it might not be the reason you're expecting here.
I have a suspicion, but you go ahead.
All right. Well, you tell me in a minute if you were right. You're looking at a tree. I'm looking at a forest. And this change might be the 670th most important thing to do for the criminal justice system. It might be one of the top 5 most important things we could do for Canadian society. And that's not the same thing, because I'm looking at polling numbers that show that the immigration in this consensus in this country is cratering.
Yep.
And it's happening incredibly fast. One of my recent episodes here on this very podcast was with a polling expert. And one of the things we were talking about is Canadian support for immigration. So Peter, just indulge me a minute. I'm going to recap this for the audience. There's 2 key numbers here. One of them is, how do Canadians feel about diversity itself? Are you comfortable with having someone in your community who is not from there? And super majorities of Canadians say yes. We're pretty okay with our neighbors or a guy in our beer league hockey team, or the parents for our kid's classmate who aren't from here. Canadians are really good about that, but we're less good about immigration as an abstract. So in general, we like the ones who are here. We just don't want any more of them, which is kind of a blunt way of putting it, but that's what the polling seems to say. The problem is this. All of these things are tracked regularly, and those numbers on both categories are tanking. Support for immigration as an abstract is tanking faster than support for diversity as a whole, but they're both moving down. And the poll numbers show accelerating velocity, especially on the anti-immigration metric, where if you look at the last 10 years, there has been significant erosion in how Canadians feel about immigration, and half of it was in the last 12 months. So you start thinking, where's that going to be in 12 months from now? You obviously, and this is not a criticism, you look at the legal system as a participant in it. Our parliamentarians, God help them, don't. They have to look at it at a broader view. And there can be things that are going wrong in the immigration system that are the 700th most important problem in the court system that are causing massive second order problems in the rest of society, or at least contributing to them. So you thought you knew what I was going to say. Was that it?
This is very close. I thought the way I translate what you say is that like the symbolic impact is more important than the actual. That's what I was going to dumb it down to. And that's not exactly what you're saying, but it's close. Like, I think what you're saying has merit. I do agree that there are certain issues in which there is more symbolic than real attachment, in the sense that this is going to lead to bigger problems. I'm sad that we live in a world now where symbolic is much more important than substantive. We live in the Donald Trump world now, and very little is real or not real, and we blow up incidents in a way that I think is unfortunate. And I say this as a human being rather than a lawyer. I don't think the discourse, this discourse is good because we're having discourse, and you're absolutely right to point out that most people don't want to have discourse. We want to jump to a conclusion on this or the other. But if someone can convince me that this has benefit on its own merits, I would still try to make it a better proposal. I would still try and make it a proposal that addresses this in a way that makes sense, where we have a conversation about the difference between visa applicants committing murder and permanent residents driving dangerously and hurting somebody. These are two different things, and I think it would help to have those discussions. But I do take your point, and I do think that sometimes we make decisions that are symbolically important more than they are important, and I don't think we should discount that.
The only thing I'm going to say in reply to that, I have another question for you. The only thing I'm going to say in reply is that it may not be coming through on the camera, but your glasses must be awfully rose tinted if you think a love for symbolism is new. That's not a Donald Trump byproduct, man. Like, I was looking there was a really interesting chart I was looking at a couple days ago. I was researching for another story. And it was an American story, but it said, here are causes of death in the United States, like kind of gross mortality figures. Here are reported causes of death. Murder was like 27% of reported.
Way down.
1% or below of actual mortality in the United States is classified as any form of homicide. So that has never been not the case. Sorry, I double negative you. That has always been the case. So I wouldn't suggest this is a Trump thing. Question I have for you though, it's on the big philosophical thing, and then I do want to say, like I gave you my word. I'll give you some time to talk about ways to fix what ails the system, but I want to loop back on something a minute ago, because I'm going to throw a word at you for the second time in this podcast. I think there's a bit of an incongruity in something that you said earlier. I've got to rewind the clock a little bit, but this stuck out at me here. One of the things you're pointing out, and I think you're right, is that every offender, every crime, everything has its own circumstances, everything has its own context. And even though I'm not a lawyer, I obviously know that there are a variety of considerations that goes into sentencing considerations, right? So if I commit a crime, and I am convicted of a crime, a judge will consider things such as my upbringing, my circumstances, my mental health, my criminal history. Like lots of things do get pulled into this. I get it. More controversially, things like racial and ethnic background in more recent years have been pulled into it. We won't go down that garden path.
That's a whole other.
Yeah, we'll leave that for another thing. Okay. But so I raise this simply because I am aware that there are sentencing considerations that go into this sort of thing that will vary with individual circumstances.
Yep.
I do think, though, that there is a habit of thinking among people who have spent too much time staring at the court system, like too much time staring at the sun, that because there's a lot of nuances and exemptions built into the system, that those do not come at a cost. And therefore, another one is fine. And I understand the world is a more complicated place that you're ever going to be able to encapsulate in like a one paragraph definition some legislators bang out and send off to committee for review. I get it. But I think we're not doing ourselves any favors from giving up on the notion that there should be a pretty even hand. And I think talking about the desirability of sort of neutral, blind, even-handed justice, whatever descriptor you want to use, everyone will give that the token lip service acknowledgement and then immediately forget about it because they get overly excited by all the shiny nuances of any particular case here. I have never been charged with a crime. I have never been the victim of a serious crime. I hope that both of those things remain true. But I will say, if in either of those scenarios my luck runs out, I'd be okay with a system that was neutral, even if it one that wasn't favored me.
Just let me say, by the way, because I think it needs to be said here, when it comes down to the trial conviction portion of this, that holds true by and large. There are a few little isolated areas where it makes a difference, jury selection and stuff like that. But let me just say, and I think the system has many flaws we won't get into, but if you're charged with an offense, everything that happens up to the moment you're convicted should proceed in the exact same manner as it would for me, anybody else down the street, whatever. We all know that's not quite the real world, but the
people
jury
calling favors, people can afford better lawyers.
Yeah, better. Like, it's already unequal for a million reasons. Like, don't get me started, but you want to, just for your listeners, you got a big listener, I'll tell you, you want to know, as an appellate lawyer, the two factors that swing any case more than anything else. And most people would say the judge, and that's important too. But the two factors that swing a case completely equal in every which way are A, did you give a statement to police? And B, who's your lawyer? Like, those are the two biggest factors. So yes, money pays. There's a reason I'm in high demand and I can't get, it's just the way it is, right? So it's not equal. But I take your point.
Sorry to interrupt. Is your advice to not give a statement to police, by the way?
Never.
Thought so.
Never. You
just
never
wanted that
give a
on the
statement
record.
to police. The moment anybody says to you, the moment anybody ever says to you, once it gets to the point, I'm not saying never talk to police because that's idiotic. I'm saying the moment they says we are detaining you for X, do you want to make a statement? The answer is always no. And if in the 1% chance it's a yes, you do it through counsel, because counsel, if you have information to share, can do that in a way that protects you. But anyway, I see the point and I see what you're trying to say, and I don't totally disagree with you. I don't think it's as... the way I look at it is this. I think we're talking about margins, because I think what ends up happening is we have strong starting points here in Alberta, especially, and we're sort of pushed in directions anyway. And it's like a guidepost. And then every once in a while, you have really unusual circumstances, and these things do get considered. But I take the point, and I do think that sentencing disparity as a general point is problematic, because it gives rise to what you're saying in the public view when you have big disparity. But disparity is inevitable, especially when you have systems with repeat offenders. Like, you have one guy who's done this 3 times and one guy who's done it once. Like, the guy with 3 times is going to get a much bigger sentence. That's just the way it is. So yeah, it's not that simple.
Before I'll turn this over to you to talk about some of your big concerns and what your proposals are, I want to throw something at you. So you and I over the weekend were bickering on Twitter. I will not call it the letter. It's Twitter to me. And
I won't agree with bickering, but okay, we were discussing, but yes. I try not to bicker.
Well, we don't always succeed. One of your colleagues, and I don't know if someone you know personally or just someone who might follow you because they're also a system participant, came to me with a hypothetical. And they were acting in good faith. And I responded, hopefully, in reasonable good humor. I don't always stick that landing. But the scenario was a Canadian citizen and a permanent resident with deep ties to the country have both been charged with a fairly serious impaired driving offense. The Canadian citizen has their trial and sentencing one day before the permanent resident. They get 180 days. They get 6 months. That hits the threshold, as we were talking about earlier, of a serious crime, because 6 months is one of the conditions.
Yeah.
Your colleague or peer or whatever then posed to me, would I consider it unfair if the permanent resident with deep ties to the country, when being sentenced the next day, got 6 months less 1 day? Spot them 1 day less on a sentence so that their lives are not destroyed. And I said, yes, I would consider that to be unfair. Not because I don't understand the moral argument, not because I don't understand the consequences, the broader consequences that you've been talking about, but because I don't want to go to a guy and tell him, I'm sorry, you have to sit here 1 extra day so that person can continue to see their family. I can't make that case morally. I can understand the soft-hearted do-goody part of it. And I think if we actually start looking at the real world, we start getting into other scenarios where what if the actual sentencing guidelines and the circumstances should be pointing to not 6 months, but maybe 7 months. But the judge goes, I don't want to blow up this guy's whole family life. So we'll give him 6 months less a day. And then I got to go to Johnny Canuck and tell him, sorry, you got to sit here an extra month so that we don't blow up that guy's family life. I understand these might be marginal edge cases. I get it. But this was the scenario that was put to me. And I'm willing to say, yeah, it's unfair. What do you think?
Look, I think that's I don't agree, but I don't think your position is crazy. Like, I think it's I just don't look at it. I just think, first of all, it's not a realistic concern, because I don't think you have two equal people in that way. But I take the general point, and I think you can look at that in a way and say, well, that's unfair. It's unfair that guy, I don't actually think he gets more, because I don't think you compare everybody in the system, but I get that. I get that that's a concern, and that's the kind of thing that's going to make people upset about the way the system works. So I get that. I don't agree with it because, as I've said to you, Johnny Canuck at the end of it walks out and he's gone. The permanent resident with deep ties to the country is stuck in immigration proceedings for the next 5 years and may well be deported to a place he never knows. So, I mean, to me, I don't see the great injustice there, but I think it's a position people can reasonably disagree on.
I think that will conclude well, you don't like the word bickering, so I'll call it conversation phase.
I don't think it's bickering. I think more discussion about the criminal. That's why I came on, because I think that, first of all, I do take your point about people in the system are too dismissive of change to the system. I'm a huge proponent of change to the system because, like you, I don't think we can go on the way we're going. I think you are correct to point to that people are losing respect for the justice system daily. I think that's a bad thing. I don't think we should. I mean, to be perfectly honest, and you didn't ask me to come on for this, but I think constantly dumping on all the judges and the court system doesn't really help either. I think criticizing them and saying, like, these are things that don't make sense. But I think maybe you'll agree with me on this. I think that has changed. I would never have thought I'd see a leader of a party, dumping on the judges almost personally in the way that's taking place. There's just a lot of people, like, you can disagree, and we're not getting into the child porn sentencing thing because that's a whole other kettle of fish. But I'm just saying you can disagree with the court. There's very reasonable ways to do it. In fact, I commended, I think it was Bonnie Raitt, who took a very reasonable position. She disagreed. She said why. I think that position is tenable. But I'm just constantly other people, again, it's Twitter and whatever, but are just these people must have things in their closet and they're probably that doesn't help anybody. I don't see how that kind of discourse gets anything other than just rage going. So,
well, you know what? I'll respond to that before I ask you about your bigger problems. I take the unpopular view that I hate mandatory minimums, even for child pornography. I just hate mandatory minimums. I just don't like them. I also understand why we have them.
Yeah.
And I was saying to you before, mandatory minimums might not have been the top 1,000 most important issues in the criminal justice system, but I think it was a pretty important social issue. And when you and I talk about declining public faith in the justice system, it's not just people arguing on Twitter. Like, this is something that is tracked.
No, that
the government tracks this. Polling companies track it.
That I know.
I didn't bother. I wasn't going to overawe you with numbers, but I just this morning before we recorded, I actually sit down and I grabbed some information from StatCan, which does a big sort of attitudinal institutional trust surveys of Canadians.
Oh yeah, it's bad.
How do you feel about the armed forces? How do you feel about the police? How do you feel about the healthcare system? The courts are low and dropping.
Yep.
And public opinion polling shows that as well. That's been done by the private sector. And that's kind of folded in with a constellation of other issues, such as overall concern over public safety, person safety, things like that. So we've got a real problem here. I think we would agree on that. Mm-hmm. One question that I'll leave with before I yield the floor to you. You have been gracious in acknowledging the criticism I made that people who are part of the system are often so close to it they can't step back and see it. I want to ask you a question, and it's not a gotcha question at all. You talk to more lawyers than I do, probably maybe marginally, but you do. Something I've observed, and I hinted at this earlier, is that in recent years, I don't think I've spoken to anyone, officially or unofficially, who is not actually legitimately worried about the system. And we're not talking about just rage farming on social media. Like, these are people who may not have social media accounts. Examples, I'm not going to name names, but I've spoken to Crowns in multiple provinces. I've spoken to defense attorneys in multiple provinces. I've spoken to senior police officials, corrections officials, parliamentarians, on and on and on. And the overwhelming consensus seems to be that something has gotten out of control and that the system is breaking. And I've heard different explanations for it. Some of them have been basically, oh God, act of God. Like the array of forces that are hitting us are so diverse, you can't really identify one over the other. Can I just ask you a very generic question in two parts? What do you think? And the second part is, what are you hearing?
So there's no question that things have happened that have affected the court system. I don't believe in act of God, but a lot of things have happened at once, there's no doubt. And the court system is never going to be the quickest to modernize because of the nature of the participants in it. And law generally is slower to move. And what I mean by the nature of the participants in it is, like, that's everybody. Everybody has sort of vested interests in one thing or another. And it's literally like herding cats. Like, I can come up with all the proposals in the world. I will not get buy-in from like 40%, let alone 60, because like everybody has a vested interest in doing things particular ways. And you're right, the people in the system have the most vested interest. It's like saying, do I trust the public service, Union of Canada to decide how many public government workers we should have? It's like they have their own interest. And that's just a reality with it. What do I think? I'm deeply, deeply concerned about a lot of systemic forces that are pushing in a lot of ways. One of those being that some of the nuance about what courts do is sort of being lost. Like, we're sort of looking at this as courts should provide a one-stop shop for everything that ails society, and that's just not true. It can't do it. The courts are not really designed to do that. The courts are designed best to adjudicate disputes, and the more the courts delve into other areas and try to solve other public problems, the more we lose some of our respect for the courts. And I do think that's real. By and large, I mean, that's a small commentary. By and large, I am a pro-Charter of Rights guy by a mile, partly because I have real concern about the way our government makes decisions and how difficult it is to change government decisions, because like elections are few and far between. So I really have concerns about that, especially where people are given a lot of power and they have the ability to use that power in problematic ways. But I am I do have real questions and concerns about the way decisions on the charter have tended to politicize and polarize Canadian society. And I think some of that was inevitable, but I do think that is a concern to be looked at. Yeah.
One, just a quick follow up and then we'll move on here. You gave me a very lawyerly answer to that. Let me ask you as a citizen, how do you feel about how the courts are serving the community you live in? You mentioned you have some kids. Are they being well served?
Absolutely, unbelievably concerned from all sides. I think the way the courts are working now does a disservice. There's a reason that I call my talk, the talk that I give on sexual assault. I'm not doing it as a defense lawyer. The talk is called Everybody Loses. We all lose right now. It is a series of decisions and things that are happening that push us in a particular direction. I'm terrified for everybody. The person who's charged with the offenses, the person who's the victim of offenses, the people who have to work in the system with the offenses, and the public at large who are looking at this going, what the hell are you people doing? I think there are serious systemic problems that if we don't address, and I see no reason to believe that we are addressing them, we're going to have more problematic outcomes. People are going to look at it and they're going to lose faith in the court system. What will happen with that? I'm not a sociologist, but am I concerned as a citizen? Yes. I don't think it's good that everybody hates the courts. I don't think that's a good thing at all.
You don't have to be a sociologist. I'm going to tell you something I've been telling line readers, listeners, etc. for years now. As a trained historian, for the love of God, read a history book. Basically,
Absolutely.
Any of them will do.
Absolutely.
I don't think the broader public knows how recent a development our entire notion of neutral, professional, non-military police feeding people into a neutral, independent court system that is separate from both the police and the executive. That's an experiment that's only about 200 years old, and we've been walking around beating each other's heads in for a few 100,000 years. So we probably shouldn't lose track of how we used to maintain public safety and justice. All right, you're on more of a schedule than I am, but I have promised you some time at the end to just kind of extemporize a bit. I think we were kind of working our way there with that last question, but you had said you had a lot of concerns about the system, but you also had some ideas on how to fix that. I yield the floor to you. Go.
So, I mean, in a macro sense, not focusing on any other aspect of the system, I am of the view that the biggest problem we have right now, and this has increased multifold during my 30 years in the system, is complexity. Complexity is the unknown evil. No one will write about it on the front pages. No one will care about it. I am telling you that at the heart of 90% of our problems in the justice system, is complexity. And the reason I say that is complexity is killing everybody's ability to do their job. I want you to understand how complex the system is. I started doing this in 2015. I went back into the system and I started looking at stuff. Since 2020, I have built a business. I want you to understand that has two core aspects to it. One is I educate lawyers on what the law is. And I am paid really good money to sort of come up with a system because the law is so complicated that the lawyers don't understand it. And neither do the judges. I am telling you, Matt, that I can walk into just about any courtroom at any time of day. And keep in mind, let's assume for the moment that I'm right, that I know a fair bit about the law because I spent 20 years studying it. Just to take my area of evidence law, I can walk into any courtroom, and if I hear lawyers discussing the problem correctly, it'll be like a first. I'm not saying that never happens, but not understanding the core rules that run our system is one of the most rampant problems we have. You won't see any headlines about it, but I'm telling you, it's killing us because complexity leads to delay, and delay is the evil in our system. Delay hurts everyone. It's killing us. And if we don't make our system more understandable, the public will never get it. They don't get it. Most lawyers don't get it. Half the judges don't get it. We are just creating a system in which complexity almost exists for its own purpose. And I do not think that is a good thing. I do not think it is a good thing that lawyers, I say sometimes that while it's a good thing for me and my family, I don't think the system is good, that you've got to come to an expert, that lawyers have to call me to ask me, how does this particular area work? Layers of experts is not healthy. It's not healthy for our system. And if we don't address this, and nobody seems inclined to, we're in serious trouble.
I'm starting to wonder if maybe I won you over a little bit earlier when I said we should maybe be aiming for that ideal of a simple standard that is universally applied. Because talking about complexity, two things I'm going to say in response to you, and they're both notes of agreement. I do have a lot of lawyer friends. One of them had told me he's nearing retirement now. He's really looking forward to it. He was telling me that right now when he tries a case, he does criminal defense law as well. And when he tries a case, the number of pretrial reports he needs to generate
is
exponentially higher than it would have been 20 years ago. So you've got a serious crime. It's like it's an assault. Yeah. It was he gave me an example of an assault. And he goes, once upon a time, we would look at police reports, medical reports, correctional facility reports. We'd probably get a psych report on the accused. We would look a little bit into the circumstances of the the victim. Was there any prior relation there? And then within a couple of months, he would be the defense, the Crown. They'd each have maybe a dozen reports of a few dozen pages each. They'd read them. Off they go. He says now he could have a trial for a mid-tier criminal offense that could generate 50 or 60 or more reports that need to be circulated and reviewed by everybody. And the delay part of it, you're 100% right. And to the extent I write about these issues at all, I write about this a lot. Most of our bail debate right now is actually downstream of delay, because we would feel way less reluctant about putting people out on bail or not putting them out on bail if they were going to have a speedy trial, as opposed to maybe. Yeah. And the personal consequences of that, Peter, a guy I went to school with many, many years ago reached out to me out of the blue a few years ago because his father had been accused of a very serious crime. And he explained the circumstances of the accusation to me. And look, obviously the guy is biased towards his dad.
Sure.
But the circumstances that, as they were explained to me, it made me think, I don't think this guy's guilty. It seemed and look, believe victims, blah, blah, blah. But it seemed like the accuser was motivated by a degree of mental instability and personal animus rather than strong evidence. And ultimately, I'll skip to the end of the story. Yeah, that's what was concluded.
But
after
took years.
4 years of this man's life.
Yeah.
And the accusations were such that they were life-altering.
Yeah.
Destroyed a career, almost destroyed a family.
I could give you 50 examples in my own practice that I'm dealing with, trying to rectify things like this, one involving a permanent resident, but that's another story. And it's like, so I totally agree. And I think what we've done is we've sort of just accepted this. Nowhere is what you said before more true than in this. Well, it takes this amount of time to do this, and it takes this much time. But to me, at the core of it is the complexity that then spawns the delay. We somehow forgotten. And I say this in every talk that I do, that we can, every time I hear we need more judges and we need more of this, I want to just tear the little roots of hair that I have left out. Because what I'm saying is, at what point does an economist come and look at this and go, this system is insane. You can't keep feeding it inputs. I call it the beast. In my presentation, I had this picture of a monster. And I'm like, look, we can do all these things. But what I'm telling you is if we don't simplify the system, we're screwed. And my whole sexual assault talk is on that. It's not about at a certain point, if we want to get everything perfect and dot every I and cross every T, and we want to make this the perfect system for everybody, great, let's do that. It's going to take 7 years to adjudicate a matter, and that this can't happen. This is killing everybody, and that's the problem.
Are you a space nerd at all? You know what the rocket equation is?
No, give it to me, though. I want to hear.
I don't know the mathematics of it, but basically the rocket equation is a way to mathematically solve a problem. If you want a spaceship that is going to go faster, no problem. You put a bigger engine on it. but the bigger engine weighs more, which means you just canceled out the gain of the bigger engine because now that bigger engine is pushing a heavier ship. You want a ship to go further with the same engine, no problem. It just needs a bigger fuel tank, except the weight of the fuel is going to burn the engine less efficiently. Your ship's not going to go that far. So there have been ways over the years where you kind of optimize engine size, fuel content, things like that. Exactly, the sweet spot. But what you're kind of describing in the legal system is the rocket equation, which is, okay, we're gonna make it bigger. Oops, it just became less responsive. Our less responsive system, clearly we got to put more money into it. The money breeds complexity. The gains are negligible if they exist at all. Okay, we've got a couple minutes left if you want them. You've mentioned complexity, you've mentioned delays. How would you solve these problems? Yeah,
so for example, like I'll take your rocket equation, I'll take one particular example. So my proposal, one of the ones I've put online is we have created a system now where we do a lot more pretrial adjudication, which is a terrible idea. It just takes a hell of a lot longer to do things pretrial. And we've set up these rules and we've said, and I'm not going to comment on whether they're good or bad. For example, we're going to screen all the records of sexual assault complainants. That's what we're going to do. If you ask me as a lawyer, do I have any concerns about that from a fair trial standpoint? I would look at the system and I do have some concerns, but could we design a system that does that fairly? Absolutely. But that's not what I'm looking at. What I'm looking at is, what I'm seeing is you're taking a system that's going to be optimal in an optimal world, but you're adding massive amounts of time and problem onto the system. So every time we take an initiative and we say this is designed to help somebody, what I'm trying to tell you is it doesn't help them. What it ends up doing is it ends up expanding the nature of the trial and causing as many problems as we're actually trying to solve, probably more. So the more that we try to complicate matters to get to what people view as a fairer output, in the end, you don't get to that fairer output because the questions of delay and complexity end up recreating, in my opinion, at an exponential standard, a lot of the inequity you're trying to remove. Yeah. And nobody ever thinks of that. Everybody looks at it their own particular way and says, let's do this, let's fix that. And I'm like, what are we repairing? And how bad is it going to be under the new system? And that needs to be, in my opinion, an absolute core issue for every reformer and every parliamentarian to say, is this new thing that we want to do going to add more complexity that it's going to solve? And I don't think that's ever taken. I think we take things because they advance some particular goal or another. And every time we do that, some of those goals are great. Some of them aren't so great. But at the end of the day, what I know is if you give lawyers lots of tools to argue things, they're going to argue ad infinitum, forever. That's what we do.
I'll let you go now because I know you got to run. But first of all, it sounds like you're also describing the accounting system, right? Like we have an entire class of accountants because the tax code's incredibly complicated.
It's so complicated.
Why is it incredibly complicated? Well, because every year the politicians need to announce something come budget time. So they announce, well, you know what, we're making it easier for you, generic family, to afford this by adding a few lines to the tax code. And the next thing you know, you have entire classes of professional whose only job it is to read the friggin' tax code. I'll leave you with this, though. I think it speaks to your point. There was a quote I heard once, and I might mangle it a bit, but quoting it from memory, the engineer knows he has achieved perfection not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. So that would be a way of maybe starting to look at the system and like, what is it trying to do, and what is the smallest, leanest way we can do it?
I wish we did all those things.
Peter, thanks for the time. Get back to justice.
All right. Take care of yourself.
Take care.
Bye.
You too. Peter Sankoff was my guest today, lawyer, professor, business owner, and a more reasonable person on a podcast than those who had been watching him and I tweet at each other over the weekend might have concluded. Mind you, the same thing probably can be said of me. Thank you for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Check us out at www.readtheline.ca. Like and subscribe to us there if you want to see more of this. If you're watching this online, whatever app you're on, please subscribe to it. Do all the things you can to help the line grow. The Line podcast will be up in a couple of days with our next episode on Friday. Until then, This has been On the Line.